Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animated features not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano, and today, I figured I'd do something simple, something that wasn't too long, something that has been heard of but not too popular, like something that is, I wouldn't say obscure, but at the very least, compared to other bigger features, wouldn't rank among them. So I turned to a childhood movie of mine. I say childhood, but realistically, I saw this as a kid. I completely forgot about it for years. I only remembered it many years later when I saw an internet reviewer talking about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that." That's weird. I thought it was just something I made up in my head, and that movie is Rock-A-Doodle. Hey, before we get this video started, I just want to say thank you for coming on, and if you enjoyed this video, like it, comment below for whatever reason you have, whether it's a question, or you just want to give a shout out, or just whatever. And if you've been watching a few of my videos, why haven't you subscribed yet? I mean, I'm sure some of you already have, but if you haven't, please consider subscribing. It won't hurt. It will get you more of my content. And if you really want to see some more stuff, ring that bell. Again, thank you for coming on, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Now, for those of you who are unaware of Rock-A-Doodle, that's perfectly fine. It's pretty much another movie by Don Bluth, the guy who was responsible for stuff like The Land Before Time, An American Tale, just a bunch of stuff that wasn't Disney, but a lot of people would probably mistake for Disney now, given that it was 2D animated, and in all fairness, Don Bluth was a Disney animator before he went off on his own. And yeah, this is not one of his stronger works. And to be fair, even if it's not, I will say that if there's one thing that Don Bluth films always excelled at was the animation. Whether the movies were good, and a lot of them weren't, they often had some really nice looking animation, and that's no exception for this movie. Now, with Rock-A-Doodle, that's pretty much, it's kind of like a childhood fairy tale kind of story, and it makes sense given that the story itself, aside from being based on a fairy tale, in movie is presented as the story that a mother tells her kid, and then the kid pretty much experiences it. I mean, they make it seem like as if it's a dream, but by the end of the movie, it's like, no, it actually happened, which weird, but whatever. But yeah, it's pretty much just a whole movie where this kid gets read the story of Chanticleer, which is this rooster who pretty much is, like with all roosters, he crows in the morning and believes that without him, the sun won't come up. And it turns out that, yes, because of his crowing, the sun comes up. And in story, at some point, Chanticleer gets into a fight with another rooster who is, they say this even within the movie, is sent by the bad guy of the movie, which is an owl. And as a result, the sun starts to come up before he even crows, so a lot of people start doubting him, and he's pretty much left in ruins because he realizes, like, okay, so my crowing didn't do anything at all, so he's pretty much forced out of the farm. And surprise, it turns out that the sun wasn't actually coming up, or it was, I'll get to it in a bit, but because of that, the sun hasn't come up, and it's raining nonstop. And this is where we get to, like, the story with the real boy, and this is all done in live action. His farm, it's all, it's raining so heavily that stuff is getting damaged. The father is trying to pretty much create, like, these little barricades to prevent the water from flooding the entire farm. The boy wants to help, but he's too young. Only his older brothers and the mother are helping while he's left in the room. And of course, the boy just starts calling out for Chanticleer, hoping that Chanticleer will come in and bring the sun out. As a result, instead, the owl comes in, and the owl turns him into a cat, and that's where most of the movie, where what the kid is for most of the movie. He's just a cat because he's gonna be animated alongside the other characters, and it's kind of good that they keep him animated because the live action effects in this are not the greatest, but we'll get to that in a bit. So yeah, it's just this big whole journey where the main character, who's now a cat, has to go and find Chanticleer in the big city alongside some of the other characters that were friends to Chanticleer. Like, there was a dog who narrates the whole movie. He's played by Phil Harris, who, if you're not familiar with who that is, he's the guy who voiced Baloo and Thomas O'Malley in The Jungle Book and The Aristocats originally. And alongside that, you have like this little mouse girl and this what do they call it? I think it's magpie or something like that. But it's, it's a type of bird. It's not necessarily a woodpecker, but it's something like that. And yeah, they're going on this whole big journey to find Chanticleer. From there, it turns out that Chanticleer has become this sort of Vegas act known as the King. He's not voiced by Elvis, because of course by this point Elvis had already passed on, but he is voiced by Glenn Campbell. Good singer if you've ever heard of any of his stuff. And it turns out that this is all just something that the owl pretty much concocted just so that he would never come back to the farm to basically bring the sun out. Basically, he'll be in this big city where it's always bright because there's all these lights and it's that kind of stuff. He's got a manager who works for the owl. He's got a girl there who's voiced by the actress who was Audrey in Little Shop of Horrors. And yeah, that's pretty much what it all comes down to. The owl itself is voiced by Christopher Plummer, and it's honestly a really good voice acting performance. I mean, I know that Christopher Plummer has done other voice acting work since, and even before his passing, he did multiple stuff. But it's one of those where it's like, I kind of forget that it's Christopher Plummer half the time. And even though the character is not the greatest, it is a fun villain character. And I do like his interactions with his nephew, who's like the main henchman throughout the movie, who's following the main characters, trying to stop them from reuniting with Chanticleer. But yeah, that's generally what the whole movie is. It's pretty much just this whole thing where Chanticleer has to be told that, he was right all along, and they were wrong and they're sorry, and the kid is pretty much trying to save his farm while there's like a ticking time clock, because you cut back to pretty much like the other animals from the farm hiding within the main character's room, and they're pretty much like, look, our only defense is this flashlight because it scares the owl, but the battery is running out, so it's like, okay, we got to get back there before the battery is completely drained. And that's, generally speaking, where the whole movie, our tension is, so to speak. If it sounds weird, it's because it kind of is, and it's honestly not a very good movie. But, like I said at the start of this, animation, it's incredible. Like, a lot of the movement is just very nice, it's very fluid. It's like, if you've seen a Don Bluth movie, you know what to expect, and it's still very nice to look at. Like, it's not one of his greater features, but it is one that I'm like, if I'm going to be watching something that's not good for 70 minutes, I'm glad I'm watching one that is nice to look at, which is something that I do kind of miss about a lot of animated features. Like, not that a lot of modern animated features look bad, but I've noticed that if your modern animated feature looks bad and is more for kids than it is for adults, the animation is not going to look great. Even the ones that are pretty good, like, whether it's like Illumination, DreamWorks, or not Blue Sky anymore, but pretty much like if it's one of those other studios that do like a sort of mediocre animation, even Disney, really, if I'm being honest, because CG looks so, I don't want to say generic, but like a lot of it looks so similar to each other, because the focus is more on realism. It's changing, but we haven't fully gotten there where it's, completely different. But yeah, like with a lot of it, since it's more focused on detail, like even if it's a well animated thing, it doesn't look as interesting. Like there's not the same kind of, I don't know, like the same kind of joy and spirit that you would find in a 2D animated feature when it comes to this stuff. Maybe I'm more nostalgic for 2D stuff, but I'm not gonna lie, I would much rather watch this over a modern mediocre movie, modern mediocre animated movie. If only because it does look very pretty. But yeah, beyond that, I mean, it's exactly what you would expect from something like this. It's very much a short fairy tale kind of thing. The kind of thing that you would expect to see from Disney, but without the polish. And what I mean by that is that there are narrative beats in this that just make no sense unless you look up the background information on it. Like I said, the main thing is there's this whole bit where, of course, Chanticleer is proven to be fake just because the sun came up, and there is an explanation why if you look at it behind the scenes, but if you look at it in the movie, they never bother explaining why. I mean, the closest you get to it, and you do kind of notice this, is that the sun is popping up slowly, but the second he's shunned and is, pushed away, it goes away. But you would assume that that's just a time-lapse thing, not really that it actually went away. Behind the scenes, they actually do explain, like, okay, the reason why that happens is because the sun was so used to hearing him crow that it was already getting ready to pop out. And then that short second where it was popping out, like just waiting to hear that crow, people mistook it as like, oh, the sun is already coming up. And of course, when it disappears, it's because like, okay, well, I didn't hear him crow, so, going back to bed or whatever. And I'm like, that feels like something that you should have explained, especially because this is a movie that is heavy with narration. Like I said, Phil Harris plays the dog in this, and he narrates throughout the entire movie. And, I don't really mind it. It's a little annoying just because it's like, I don't need this much explanation. But, it's Phil Harris, so it's nice to listen to. And I'm just left like, yeah, that probably should have been brought up within the narration, because I feel like without that, it kind of makes the whole thing kind of confusing. Like, well, then how did the sun come up? Did they fake a thing? Like, we could just assume that they faked the thing, but it's left with such a weird thing. And it's just like, okay, so I guess that was the case. But yeah, it turns out that because it was so used to hearing that crow, it was already getting ready to pop out. So I'm like, okay, that could have been a nice little thing, especially because like with this being a fairy tale, it feels plausible as a fairy tale kind of thing. Like, obviously it still sounds like BS, but I'm like, look, for most of the movie, we're assuming that this is the kid's dream. It turns out that it's real. But, it's like, look, it starts off with it being a fairy tale, so I don't mind fairy tale logic coming into play. I really don't like how a lot of people try to nitpick this kind of stuff, but it's like, dude, it's all make-believe. Just run with it. As long as they explain their reasoning, and it's like, okay, yeah, that fits within the world that they're creating, I don't care. Even going beyond that, it's like, okay, so because of that, he's run away. There's the whole thing with him being the title Rock-A-Doodle thing, where it's like, okay, so he's basically become this famous performer because it turns out that this guy that works for the Owl picked him up. So he pretty much is the whole like, hey, I'm making money off of them, and this Owl guy, gets what he wants, so it's all good. But I don't know. I just kind of feel like, if you were so determined into making sure that this guy would not bother you, you would probably just kill him at that point. And I know to an extent, that comes down to like, look, it's a kids movie, don't worry about it. But it's like, no, but throughout the movie, the characters showcase that they're not afraid from killing characters, because you got the sidekick of the villain, the nephew, who is constantly trying to kill the main characters, except for Chanticleer. And I'm like, dude, why don't you just send him to kill Chanticleer? Like, you really don't need him alive. But again, kids movie, so I guess I shouldn't complain too much. I don't know. It's not a very smart movie. It's not a very strong, well-made movie. But like I said, at the end of the day, the best thing about it is just that the animation is really good in this. The music is fine. I mean, you got people that could sing, especially like with Glenn Campbell there and Ellen Green, playing the girl that he's in love with, or tries to make him in love with, whatever. They end up being together anyway, so whatever. But yeah, it's like I do like the thing about the music. I do also like the little jingle that the owls make, because you also have like the owl with his whole posse that they're kind of singing around the characters that stay behind, waiting for them to lose power. And it's like, it's not an especially great song, but it's kind of catchy, and I'm like, okay, every time it cuts back to this. I kind of liked hearing a little bit of this, especially as it grows stronger. And, at it being just 70 minutes, I mean, it's a very quick set. It's not going to be something that you remember too much, beyond just some of the absurd things in it. But at the same time, nothing that I would ever complain about. I don't know, for the most part, I don't recommend it. It really is a movie that I'm like, if you're going to watch it with a kid. If you're a big fan of animation and just want to watch something that looks pretty, there are other movies, but I guess this might be helpful in studying certain things, like the way the animals move is kind of nice. But again, I would recommend watching other stuff because there are plenty of other beautiful movies to look at that are better if you're into it in that way. But yeah, I would really only recommend it if you're watching it with a kid because it's a very easy movie to sit through. And even though I don't really like it, I'm like, a kid wouldn't mind it. And there's really nothing bad with that. A lot of people like to say the whole like, oh, well, if you're watching it with a kid, why don't you get something that's good? And that's like, yeah, but sometimes the kids won't be interested in stuff that you think is good. So it's like, this will be simple enough. And even beyond that, it's like, it's harmless. It's not going to make your kid any dumber. It's not going to make him any worse. I see no problem. And if a kid enjoys it, and it probably would be enjoyed because it's got animals and it's, bouncy, it's cute, and, it's the kind of stuff that, like I said, with me as a kid, I'm like, yeah, I was kind of into it. I mean, I didn't really love it enough to remember it all that well, because once I did see that it was a real thing, I was like, oh, okay, I don't really remember that. I mean, I remember it, but I don't think of it in any kind of fond way. Yeah, just a very simple thing. I mean, the biggest thing is that really stands out as a negative to me is just that the way they mix the live action and the animation is not the greatest, which is why it's good that it's not there for long, but it's especially noticeable once you get to the end of the movie. And I know that's probably just because they haven't really bothered doing much of a restoration for this movie, because when you see the live action kid next to all these animated characters, it really becomes noticeable. Like, yeah, they just, like, it's not a green screen, but it's like okay, yeah, he's glowing, and I'm assuming that's supposed to be because it's bright, but it's like he's completely off from everyone else. It looks kind of like when you have like people that are on a green screen, and like, you can see like the whole green around them, like it kind of looks like that. Yeah, not a very good look to it. Again, maybe it's just because it was never really restored, but like I kind of doubt it. It still looks horrible. And it's a shame because apparently that the reason why that is because they originally had someone else doing the live action segment, but I guess he dropped out or passed away. I'm not entirely sure what was the deal on that, but I read something about how whoever was in charge of the live action just wasn't involved eventually, and they pretty much were forced to like, okay, let's just do what we can to do it. And it's like, not saying that animation directors can't do live action, but it's one of those things where, well, yeah, if you've never had experience doing that, then this kind of makes sense now. And apparently there was also plans for it to originally do like a sort of Wizard of Oz thing, which makes sense because it's on a farm. It's like a supposed dream sequence and whatnot. But like apparently originally it was supposed to start off with it being black and white, and it wouldn't transition into color until the animated characters came in. But that plan clearly fell through the wayside, and it's, I don't know, a little worse for it. I mean, not that it really would have changed much, but it was like a neat idea to make it even more different, to make it at least feel reminiscent of a classic movie. But I don't know. I don't think I have much else to say, really. I mean, this is just a very simple movie. Like I said before, it's cute. It's not bad. It's also not good, but, I wouldn't really watch it. For the most part, the animation is the saving grace of it. Beyond that, if you got a kid, they'll probably enjoy it. If you don't, I would definitely recommend just watching other stuff, even other stuff from Don Bluth. Realistically, if you wanted to go with with an animated feature that you wanted to like study for movement and stuff like that. I mean, if anything, you could even watch. Granted, this is mostly a live action movie, but you could watch the segment in Xanadu where they turn into animated characters. I mean, there's a whole story on that, but when it comes down to it, Don Bluth was hired to do this animated sequence for that movie, and it's like, you know, if you want something like that, you know, that's 3 minutes versus this 70-minute movie, which again, not very long, quick set, but I mean, I would prefer watching anything else. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, Rock-A-Doodle, it's cute, but nothing special. The voice cast, I think, is perfectly fine. You know, it's times like these that I do get reminded that, hey, look at that. You know, a lot of people like to blame Aladdin for like bringing in big name celebrities into voice acting and making that more common, but realistically, that was always kind of the case with a lot of these things. I mean, this movie has, like I said, the biggest name would be Christopher Plummer acting wise, but you still have names like Glenn Campbell or Phil Harris, who, you know, were recognizable names, you know, for their time. So to call it, you know, something that Aladdin started is just BS. But yeah, I mean, just really not much like I can really say. So thank you for listening. This has been Octaviano Macias, and yeah, I hope to see you again next time. Hopefully with something a bit more mature to talk about. See you again next time.
If I kill my nephew, would that be murder or charity?
Thank you for coming on today. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel where you'll see video versions of these podcasts. And if you just want to listen to them, there's always the option of just following the podcast on their various sites, whether it's Spotify, Podbean, or Apple Podcasts. Whatever you choose, I hope you continue enjoying these. And if you want to support me even further than that, there's always the option of Patreon. With Patreon, even just $1 will get your name on the video versions of this and on other videos that I may do outside of these podcasts. A few dollars more gets you some behind the scenes info, and as this continues to grow, you'll find that there's more perks to it. So I hope you consider supporting me through Patreon as well. In any case, again, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day.